Welcome back to Empowered and Out, the LGBTQ plus career coaching podcast. This podcast is where we help LGBTQ plus professionals reclaim purpose, confidence, and joy in their careers. I'm your host, Jonathan, and today we're diving into a conversation that's going to hit home for anyone who's ever felt stuck, burned out, or boxed in by traditional career paths. Our guest today is Charlotte Snowden, a career and leadership coach, NLP practitioner, and founder of Set Up for Success. With over 20 years of experience in leadership development and organizational transformation, Charlotte helps professionals break free from burnout and create careers that actually fit their lives, not the other way around. She's here to share her story of walking away from toxic work without a plan B, how NLP helped her rebuild confidence, and why a portfolio career might just be the future we've been waiting for. Get ready for powerful insights, real talk, and permission to redefine what success looks like on your terms. So if you're a longtime listener or tuning in for the first time, I am so glad you're here. And Charlotte, welcome to Empowered and Out. I am so glad that you are here.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan, for inviting me on as well. It's exciting to be able to share the story and hopefully help people who maybe resonate with it in some way.
I am sure they will. I feel that I've done a good job of getting some pretty great guests on. So I think it may not resonate with everyone, but I have a feeling at least you'll connect with at least one person. And I say that pretty strongly and confidently just based on how successful my podcast has been so far. So not to toot my own horn, but I'm pretty sure you will have someone that listens and gets it and even reaches out. So let's get started. So you've been in the world of leadership and career coaching for over 2 decades. What was the turning point that led you to walk away from a toxic work environment and build something different?
So there's actually been a couple of, twice I've done it, all for different reasons, but actually there's been some real, I guess, similar reasons why I walked away in that moment. So both times, if I remember back, and the last time was almost that's it, I'm done. But both times have been very much around the organizational culture and the leadership that I've been sort of, I guess, directed into in a lot of ways. And most of the time it's always about how they're making you feel in some shape or form. And normally it's around their values or their selfishness or whatever it is that clashes with you and what you believe in. And I found myself in both times reporting to someone who was either selfish in the sense of they were out for what they wanted to achieve, and it didn't matter who they, I guess, walked over in a lot of ways. But also it's the unsupportive environment and how draining that can be. So it became quite toxic. And it wasn't just me who was impacted. But for me, I think whilst in those moments, what really helped was actually understanding that it wasn't about me and actually I was good. But at the time, you don't realize that. It's not until you have been outside that situation. I think that's what helped me when I get into the second time of being in that position. Is the first time I was very much, God, I'm on my own. I don't know who to talk to. I've got this conflict. I know I don't want to go to work. I know I don't want to leave because I have to be there in the sense of financial commitments and things like that. So you find yourself stuck, which is, and a lot of people get themselves into that position. Eventually, there's something always sort of tips the balance, isn't there? The first time it just got to a point where ultimately I couldn't take any more. And the day that I thought, right, that's it, I've had enough. And I'd literally just handed my notice in and played that out and left. But actually, the second time, it was a little bit more, probably quicker the second time because I recognized all the triggers from the first time. So I understood that I was not supported. I understood that I knew what good leadership looked like. I'm a leadership development. I've done that for years. And this particular company wasn't displaying that. So at that point, I was like, actually, and if you're not willing to seek the help that you actually employed me to come in to do, then ultimately that's not the right fit and that environment isn't right. So that's, for me, again, there was no plan B in either of the scenarios. But for me, the belief that I deserved better and I knew it wasn't right, it was enough to tip me over the edge, I think, and leave. But I guess the key things I learned from that was quite interesting throughout of it. And I think the first one was the power of the alignment between your values and what's important to you, what you believe good is around leadership and what good looks like versus the context or what you're actually dealing with. And the cost of actually ignoring the misalignment in a lot of ways and thinking, oh, it'll be all right. Give it 12 months and it'll go over. But actually, in a lot of ways, it doesn't. But a lot of people fed back at the time when especially the first time I put it in, say, actually, it's quite a courageous thing to do. And it is. You're ultimately protecting your own well-being. And I actually think that's, whilst it didn't feel courageous at the time, it was more important for me that I just made sure that my mental, emotional stability was prioritized. And often we do delay walking away because we think it's safer. But actually, the first time when I look back, staying in that environment was actually worse because it eroded a lot of my confidence, a lot of trust in what my ability was. And it took a while to come back from that.
I like that you, and you mentioned it numerous times, that you saw the environment you're in, you saw the lack of leadership, you saw the lack of support, and you knew, even though you had people telling you, oh wow, I can't believe, that was so great you did that. But you're right, it is for our self-worth, it's for our mental health. We can't be in those types of situations for too long. I've had a few places where I had worked over the years that I knew it was time to get out. I knew that I was definitely not getting the support. I knew that if I stayed longer, I was going to be distancing myself from even friends and family because of the way I had been being treated in that work environment. And I remember when I did leave one company, my roommate was like, wow, you are so different. You're out of that. I was like, well, yeah, because I got out of that space. I got out of an unhealthy space that I was in. And I remember him thanking me again and again. Oh my gosh, thank you for getting out of that space, because you were not the same person before you were not where you were before you went in with that company. I was like, well, I had a little bit of hindsight that this probably wasn't a good place to be, and that I needed to get out for especially my mental health. It just wasn't good. And I wasn't the only one. When I left, I wasn't the only one. Like you said, there was other people that were feeling this, and I was the one who really took the leap first, but there was definitely more that followed because they said, no, we can't do this anymore.
Yeah.
So what did
And I've
that
seen it as well.
decision, yeah. So with the decision to just jump, to leave where the toxic environments, were there doubts or fears you had to push through? And how did you know you were truly ready?
Well, there was obviously doubts and fears. The biggest doubt was, would I find something else and would I find another job? And I think society sort of drives us into a place where we have to be a certain way and we have to have a job 9 to 5 and things like that, which is quite interesting. How did I know it was? Do you know, it was just a complete gut feeling that I reached my limits. And at that point, I was like, nah, I am quite stubborn in that way. So that does help me. And once I've made my mind up about something, I just get on with it. So in that ways, it does help. But, I'm in a lucky position that stubbornness can support, but some people do get stuck for a lot longer in that way. Yeah, it's everyone's different. Everyone experiences it differently. And I guess it's just sometimes, and I think that's why I've gone into coaching now is, whilst I've done a lot of coaching, not part of my career, but for me, I don't want people to feel like they are clashing and they've got nowhere to go. I want them to be able to take their bold decisions and, back themselves. Actually, there's a big bad world out there. It doesn't have to be in what I call the one box. There's loads of, there's outside of a particular organization or a box, as I would say. And helping other people recognize that and taking that action really, for me, is, a great giving back to other people.
Nice. So, and I agree. I'm one of those stubborn people as well. So I understand. One thing I had always been told, and my mother instilled this in me, I feel like I can still hear it in my ears every single time I think about it, even though now I'm in a different position. But I know that she always was like, well, don't leave a job until you have another one. Don't leave a job until you have another one. And I feel that in theory, that makes sense. But I also understand, like, if you're in a certain situation, when you're burned out, you're just frustrated, you're not getting any help, you're not getting the direction and the guidance that you need, you have to get out of it. So I feel that, yes, my mother has a great suggestion, but it's not always going to be applicable in certain situations.
I agree. Because the other element is why you're in that particular position. If you, I remember applying for a role and going for an interview and like just not being in the right mind space because I was still stuck in that situation. So
Hmm.
actually, the clarity I got when I just went, "Nope, enough, see ya," is actually it stood me in good stead because it created that space and opportunity then to allow other opportunities in, rather than me trying to go for something, knowing I could do the job and it would be very good, not being in the right mental space and emotional space to be able to actually deal with, putting my best self forward in an interview, and that made it worse for me in the sense of that. So that really got me thinking around actually how should I also tackle what I'm going to move forward into.
So let's talk about burnout and career stuckness because they're so common, especially for LGBTQ plus professionals navigating systems that weren't built for us. What signs should people look out for that it's time to change direction?
So there's so for me, what I've observed, there's a number of different signs, and actually the biggest part is your internal compass, that I would say, and that's your gut instinct. It's amazing how that triggers and flares up much sooner than before you can mentally process it or rationalize what is and isn't correct. So things I noticed was that, on the Sunday when you sort of sat there thinking, back we go to work, here's another week. Jesus. And that's that whole dread of, God, what is this week going to bring? That is a massive red flag. Other
Hmm.
elements is when you're in work is things that you're constantly self-doubting yourself, overthinking things that you probably normally wouldn't. Like, I've seen it, even simple things like you want to send an email to a stakeholder and you sat there reading it and reading it, reading it just to make sure it lands right or it hasn't going to come back on you, or if it's loads of different things that you're trying to read into. And then ultimately you're wasting time in that way, but it's making you really sort of second guess whether you know how to do something. And then the other one that I experienced more sort of later on career wise is actually, I got to the point where I was good at my job and, I had some excitement, but then it gets to a point where you think, well, is that it? Is this all there is to life? Yes. So
Yeah.
lose your sense of joy and your growth and motivation, and you start to go, so again, it's different senses at different times throughout your career, but also I guess from as you get a bit older as well. I think I'm now obviously heading on late 40s, so for me, it's very much been a trigger of is this it? But in all honesty, when you look back, your body actually knows a lot sooner than what your brain does. So I think exhaustion, tiredness, and that tension you feel. So it's all the little things in that way. And I think our community professionals also struggle with it in a little bit more, in a little bit of a different way, because quite often they need to feel like I know, especially in my early career, like I had to almost stay out of the limelight, hide a little bit away from who I truly was. And that's expensive. And even when I talk about leadership, trying to be someone who you're not is exhausting. And that sort of shift between when you get home, taking
Hmm.
that off, and that, is there a shift? That is quite a big trigger in the sense of, are you in the right culture, in the right place as well? The other element I've quite often see is people work even harder. So basically you try to make up for everything that you think you might be shortfalling in, and that creates sort of that burnout. Yeah, so there are different ways of trying to identify what's happening for you and whether you're in the right place, right role, right organization, right culture, and things like that. The interesting part is, why do people stay stuck? And that can be
Hmm.
various different reasons, but it's usually the normal. So fear of change, the cost, obviously, staying stuck versus, moving somewhere where you don't know, will you get something? But also financial pressures. Most people have a mortgage and children and things like that. So, that keeps them there because they feel like if they do step away and they don't have something to go to, ultimately they're going to be dependent in that way. So, yeah, I think it's a lot of fears that sort of keep that person stuck in different ways.
I would agree. I feel that there were definitely times. I mean, you nailed every single thing that I've felt before in a work environment. I was like, yeah, I was there. That was me. That was me. Check, 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 check. But yeah, for me, one of the companies that I took a little bit in time in leaving was only because we were in the middle. It was the crash of like 2020 or 2008. I didn't want to leave. I was kind of in a cushy job. I was set. We were a team in the company that was not going to be let go because we were kind of the backbone of the company and the customer service call center that we were overseeing. So in one way we were kind of safe, but we were also very stressed and burned out. And by the time everything got better, I was like, all right, see ya. I'm out. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And I had a lot, again, I had teammates who were like, congrats. Like, and I don't know. For me, it made me kind of chuckle years later looking back because I'm friends with a lot of them. We had a great working relationship. We just were in a very stressful work environment. And a lot of
Mm.
them stayed on with that company for quite a while. And it kind of blew my mind. We all knew the environment. Now, I think some things, when you have potentially a change in leadership or a change in the organization, things can potentially get better. Not always. Change can make things better. That company was very well known for constantly making changes. And in the end, I was done. I couldn't do it anymore. So once someone recognizes the signs that it's kind of time to go, what's the first small step that they can take that doesn't feel overwhelming or risky?
So I guess it's depending on how far they go. So I try to get people transition through that process, depending on what's important to them in terms of values and what they need from a security perspective. But most of the time, it's just the small steps around starting to understand yourself a little bit more. Like, what is it you want? Where do you want to move to? What's your non-negotiables? And I always ask people for that. And they quite often people can't tell me the non-negotiables, but I get them to really think about the organization and the job elements they want to and aspire to. And things like, is there alternatives to having to go back into corporate rather than it being the only path fit for them as well? Because quite often we get so siloed in our thinking, and society again sort of trains us into that process and that into that corporate mindset. But actually, sometimes it just takes someone to help you sort of explore the possibilities in a lot of ways to what would be. And then knowing your strengths as well. So strengths and passions, actually figure them out. Trial and error with some of them if you're not quite sure. But if you know what your strengths are, play to them, and then find out what's going to keep you sort of motivated and elements. Because I guess, like what you said when you were in that role, it was quite cushy in a lot of ways. You had everything you needed, whilst it was high pressure. But that brings its other challenges in the sense of, yes, it can lead to burnout, but actually people feel comfy and don't want to get out of that comfort zone. But then that then
Mhm.
leads to lack of fulfillment, which is another challenge, especially. And again, I don't know if other people see this, but as later on in life, I think I've seen it a little bit more as people do get to that point where everything's cushy. I've got a good job. I've got a good that, but I'm just not enjoying it. There's just not that fulfillment. So again, it's exploring things like that to sort of say, okay, so what does this mean for you? And where do you want to be? What was the aspirations? And how can we link into that?
I like that. And I agree with you. I feel that as we get older, and I'm right there with you, you take a stronger look at what you're doing, how much longer you can do it.
Hmm.
And is this going to really benefit you for potentially maybe the rest of your working career? Or is this something that is a good jumping off point to maybe look at other alternatives? And I feel that, I mean, it's why I got into coaching. I saw that I was not in the right place. The company overall was a good company, the last company that I had worked for, but overall, it just wasn't where I needed to be. And I knew that I was better positioned to do coaching. And the podcast just kind of fell into my plate, like into my lap. I knew that I wanted to do another podcast and I knew that I had the right niche. My biggest challenge was, am I going to do interviews? Am I not? How am I going to get the most engagement? And in the end, I have been loving having interviews because I'm learning so much. And I have learned so much from other like fellow coaches like yourself that I was like, oh, I should try that in my business. I should see what my clients how they will feel about that. And I think because of doing similar types of coaching in a way that you and I do, we're kind of doing a lot of the same. I mean, clarity, like mindset work. There's a lot of stuff that we're going to help our clients because it's kind of the basics what you need to do. Like
Yeah.
there's certain things that you have to do to be able to help the client move forward. And I feel that that was what I love helping people. I love helping my clients. I love putting a voice out there that people can hear different ways to make themselves better, or where they might not have seen that that was an option before. And I think this is why I'm doing this instead of sitting behind a desk in an office in a building where it was okay. Yeah, the pay was nice, but in the end, my mental health is much better now than it was back then.
Good.
So you talk about, yeah, go ahead.
Again, it goes back down to knowing what works for you, isn't it? In the sense of what's the right balance,
Mhm.
what's the shape of that sort of different change or the career that you'd craft, which is, I guess, the first point of call for anyone that's looking to actually move or do something different.
So you talk about portfolio careers as an alternative to the traditional 9 to 5. Can you break down what that means and why you think one size fits all careers are dead? And I agree, actually. Just I'm going to say that. I agree that one size fits all career. Yeah, but
Yeah. I think it's, careers aren't linear anymore. People are trying to create more of a portfolio rather than having a one trick pony almost in my sort of language, but there we go. And as we enter a sort of a different era, I think people are choosing a little bit more purpose over tradition and expectations. The 9 to 5 model that everyone assumes the robots are on a routine, we're on a hierarchy and it's a process. And if you look at the whole end-to-end education, everything, it's all popular to that. But people are starting to go, actually, I don't know if I want that, which, is also helpful. And portfolio career for me is around how do you capture what you're really great at, what you're passionate at, and then build or a multiple income streams based on your passions and the roles instead of a specific job title or a process or a hierarchy or in one organization. Like, so for myself, portfolio is very varied. There's some themes. So there's obviously my coaching, my leadership development, my do action learning facilitation. But on the other side of it, I've actually started doing gardening as well as a business, because out of all of the sitting down behind a desk or behind a screen and things like that, the gardening allows me to get out and back to nature. So for me, it's like an outlet, but I can help people in the local community and do that. So that, it's varied. It doesn't have to be one thing at all. But also it aligns more with who I am. So I love the coaching, I love leadership development, but I also do like to be in nature, creating or tidying things up and just having that freedom in a lot of ways. And when you think about obviously people who struggle with being in that sort of corporate 9 to 5. Actually, it's great because you don't have to be in one work stream. You can dot around. And if you like variety, it helps you stay engaged and motivated because, yes, you're balancing a few what I'd call probably different projects or different businesses. If you're in corporate, you're juggling hundreds of projects. So let alone, a few businesses and with different variations, but stuff that's you're passionate about. So that multiple career stream doesn't make it flaky or doesn't make it unstable. It actually is future proofing because, if one quietens off, the other one might, shoot off. So it creates that balance. So actually, so when people look at it, they don't have to do one thing. They could do a couple of things and actually get a lot of enjoyment and create that stability, which is ultimately on your terms and it's flexible and you program it. So, and I think a lot of people say, well, we should stick to, the format and retire at whatever age, or it's increasing nowadays. But actually, it's okay to outgrow your career. And I think people just need the opportunity and permission to say, no, that's enough now. I've done my bit in time. I want something different. And that doesn't mean you've failed in any way. It just means you're evolving. And I always
mhm.
say to people that I've worked with, especially as a leader in the past, is they come to me going, should I apply for this role or should I go for this? And I always said, you know what? Keep your options open because you never know what opportunity is going to come your way. So if you've always got your eyes open, your mindset open to opportunities, then you never know what you could pick up. So, always keep your options open and test stuff out.
I like that. For me personally, obviously I do my coaching, I do the podcast. And then for me, kind of one of my fun outlets that I do is I'm in a choir. And it helps me to enjoy what I love doing with a group of amazingly talented people. And then we get to share our talents twice a year. And I feel that that helps me. It kind of helps calm me. When I initially got into the chorus, I'm in my 8th season. It was because I was in a very kind of stressed work environment, and it was a good outlet to get away. And now, because I'm where I'm at in my career as a coach and I'm hosting a podcast, it's not stressful. It's not a stress reliever anymore. I think at the moment it's actually causing stress because we're learning all the new music for our new season. But it's still fun though. I love the challenges. I was talking with the director last night and I said, that really kicked my butt. We had a piece that was really hard. And he said, well, you guys asked for challenging. And I was like, yeah, we did actually. So we did it to ourselves. But also I love getting out in nature as well. Like I I take photos, and I love to be able to get out and capture nature and capture what I'm seeing. We're coming to a beautiful part of the year where, colors changing of the temperature, the colors are, of the leaves changing. It's a beautiful time to be outside. And for me, just being outside into nature it's very relaxing and calming. And it's a thing that I have tried to tell a lot of clients in the past as well, is if you have an outlet to get away, disconnect yourself, then it's going to help in the long run. Whatever, if you're going through something stressful, looking for a job or trying to figure out a promotion or whatever it might be, that getting that outlet to get away and to get into nature, to get into a space where it's calming for you, it's going to be better in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's always going back down to routines and like practices that can help you keep centered, grounded, stop that cortisol spiking, and ultimately find ways that if it does, how do you sort of calm your nervous system to do that? And people do it in lots of different ways, but I like nature like yourself. Some people meditate, exercise is a lot of one. So yes, there's different variety of ways.
For sure. So NLP is a big part of your coaching work. For folks unfamiliar, what exactly is it and how can it help someone who's feeling lost, drained, or unsure of their next move?
Yeah, so I mean, I've studied NLP now. I think it was maybe 15 years ago when I started, but it was a while ago. But ultimately, it's classed as neuro linguistic programming. So it's about how ultimately your thoughts create behaviors and methods of communication. So it was developed in the 70s by two I guess, Richard Bandler and John Grinder, who basically studied language and behavior patterns from highly effective therapists. And they sort of came up with, the modeling exercises of communication change and how do we do that with people. Now, how do we help people create a better outcome? And it explores ultimately the process we use, so how we process the world. So that's obviously how things go through our brains in a lot of ways. How do we interpret that? So the language we then attach to it, the meaning, the assumptions and everything that goes on. But also as a result of that, then, we've got structured habits, behaviors, patterns, strategies that we run on repeat. So, everything we do is on a strategy. How we breathe is something in the back of our mind that just happens. But at its core, I think for me is really around the thoughts, words, and the behaviors are all connected. And actually, if you change one of them, they can influence each other. So, for example, you'll have heard most people get stuck or feel that they can't do something because they're running an outdated program or a thought process. So, limiting beliefs like I'm not good enough, I'd never get that, or that's not for me. They always are the things that will come up. And how do we help someone reframe that and actually build confidence and motivation from what they have experienced in order to get over some of those limiting beliefs, or even just change their thought patterns and help them reframe that? Letting go of fears and phobias can help. And NLP can really sort of give us the tools in that. So in my coaching, I use a lot of the NLP tools and the things like timeline therapy, there's anchoring, parts integration, but actually just asking some of the right questions and using language patterns to help them reframe or look at it from a different perspective. So it's practical, it's quite empowering for people because they're coming up with their own approaches and they're changing I guess, where they're feeling stuck, burnt out. So NLP can really help in a number of ways, sort of help people get over the barriers and the blockers, as I would call them, to what they actually want to achieve. Because ultimately, if you want to achieve something, there's a lot of barriers in the road. And for me, work with someone and help someone remove those, reframe them, change them in order for them to be able to move forward. So we use quite a lot of NLP in that. And it's not about, quite a lot of people say, well, you're NLPing me. And I'm like, going, no, it's not about me fixing you or, doing something that you think, "Ooh, what have you done to me?" It's helping you ultimately break down some of your own barriers and your own strategies and approaches to life in general that actually stop you. And that's it. So rewiring that internal script to help people sort of move forward is ultimately where NLP can help, especially in coaching. I see it a lot.
Nice. Like I had mentioned to you when we had our initial conversation, I've done a little bit of NLP, like studying on NLP. I don't use it in my coaching, but I see the benefits of it, and I see why it can be beneficial for a client. I just personally at this time I just haven't integrated it into my business. I'm not saying that I wouldn't, in the future. But so can you share an example, maybe from your own journey or a client experience, where NLP created a real mindset shift?
Yeah. So the most recent example is someone I was coaching that was wanting to obviously move roles, funny enough, as a career coach. And they really did have some challenges and were terrified of interviews and being put in the limelight and then the spotlight like that. They just kept, ultimately, they just freeze. Again, that fight flight with mode sort of gone on there. So I've worked with them over a couple of sessions to really understand like what triggers it in order for us to reprogram that, and actually how could it be different. We used anchoring to sort of help her find sort of that grounding and that calmness and that confidence, or if it did come up, she would be able to use that as part of a practical tool to calm and steady her nerves in the moment. And then we went through for me, it was a lot around how she'd perceived it and what she'd created and how it linked to some of the elements in her past with the relationship with her parents, and where that sort of then had triggered that, oh God, I don't know how to answer that moment. So we work through that and give her a different perspective on it to help her then ultimately give back control, so she could then sit in front of someone and ask questions as it came up. So and it can be used, in a variety of different ways, but that's the most recent example to help.
That's a great example, because that is definitely a time, especially work I've had this experience with, clients, where interviewing is definitely a very, very stressful, hurdle to get over, because I mean, even I used to just, oh my gosh, the fear that I used to have on interviews. And then just with for me, doing some mindset work and doing some other things, NLP probably would have helped, not gonna lie. But I eventually got over it, and I was actually, in the last couple jobs I had before I started doing my coaching, I was doing a pretty good job, if I do say so myself. Nothing didn't stress me like it used to. And it was because of the work I had done, and with one of my friends, that it kind of helped me see how I could make it through, and what I really needed to focus on in an interview, and where I needed to kind of take the previous focus that I had been so worried about, to take it out, to not even think about it, to take it out of the whole situation. And in the end, it was so much easier. That was just for me, but I do work with a lot of clients on the mindset on the interviews, because it is definitely a part when you're looking for a potential new role, or even a promotion, that it can be a definitely very stressful situation. But then you have others who just fly through the interviews. They're great, and they can engage really easily. Kudos to them, because I was not
Yeah.
like that before. Now, not a problem, but I have no problem talking with anyone at any time. So the podcast, so
Certainly helps.
yes, it does. So confidence, clarity, and control. You call these the foundations of a fulfilling career. Can you unpack what those look like in real life, especially for someone starting over?
Yeah, of course. So we'll start with obviously confidence. So knowing where your strengths are and ultimately being able to back yourself is critical as you move forward. So you want to make sure that if you're going into an interview or you're starting out on a new adventure, you know what you're good at, because that gives you that foundation of strength of knowing what you can do, and especially when others don't know you as well, because most questions you always get is what are your strengths? So you've got to be able to answer that, and that always comes up in an interview. Most people I find really fascinating. Obviously, as part of my leadership development, and I always ask people to write down what their strengths are. And I always try and get at least 10 out of people. Most people really struggle to get to 5, let alone 10. And actually, through the work I've done around high performing teams and how you get the right sort of, connectedness between people is really understanding each other's strengths. And if you don't know your own, then actually, how do you think you're going to go forward, and how can you play to those strengths in a lot of ways? So for me, is knowing what you're confident at, and the strengths elements are important. Clarity is always one. If you don't know what you want, if you don't know where you're going, then how do you know you ever get there? And,
Hmm.
how do you know if it's the right thing or not thing? So for me, it's understanding what is most important to you, whether understanding your values, the environment you want, what's your purpose, what you want to get out of stuff, and knowing what you want. But also equally, what I've said before is actually knowing what you don't want as well. And this is true for if anyone's in relationships, and knowing what you want and don't want is really critical, and all relationships in that way. But yeah, so the clarity around the end goal and the achievement, and ultimately it allows you to make tactical decisions. It could be that you're stepping out of a role into a sideways role in order for you to be able to then get the experience and things like that to then move up. So again, that clarity is important, because if you don't know how this next role fits, you could be just jumping ship in a lot of ways, and just to get out. And I've seen people do that a lot of times. They just want to get out, so they will literally go 20 odd applications, and whichever comes up, I'll go for it. Again, really clear on what you want. And then control is around having the tools, the boundaries as well, sort of what you will and won't accept as you move roles, because that's really critical to keep your authenticity up on what you want, but also it really does help from an ownership of the next steps. Like, how do you know what you're going to take? Where are they at? So having a little bit more control over that, and feeling empowered as part of that control, because ultimately you're taking the actions and the steps that you really want to achieve. And without these, I think people drift. So you don't really design a career and life on your terms. You just sort of waft around in some ways without sort of the clarity of those elements. So for those starting out, we rebuild a lot of the work. The work I do is about rebuilding sort of that confidence, clarity, and that connectedness with what you want to achieve. It's not just about chucking CVs out and covering letters and hope for the best, which I do often quite see.
Nice. I agree with you. All three of those, they're very important. I work with clients on all three as well. So I definitely know how important those are. And you explain them so beautifully. But you see people struggling. What do you see out of those three, confidence, clarity, or control, that people struggle with the most? And how do you help them build it?
That's difficult, because the two biggest ones that impact people are the clarity or lack of, and then lack of confidence. So they both connect. How do I work with people? Over a period of time, we really trying to open people's self-awareness up to the clarity on what they want. That's always the first port of call. So in terms of where do you want to go? What does that look like? And then on the top of that, we would then start to work on confidence before you would go into that, order of importance is really sort of knowing what you want and what you don't. A lot of people really struggle with understanding their values. And I think sometimes that, again, when you look at stuckness and being in the wrong environment, a lot of the times it's because whatever you're doing within a current organization is they are clashing your values. So something doesn't feel right. And that's actually really important. So next time you go into a new role, you want to pick a company that's actually more aligned. And when you're, in interview, the interview is a two-way thing. And I think we should be more confident in actually quizzing and having conversations around why the hell should I come and work for you, actually, rather than it always being, well, what you bring into the organization. Because I see so many people trying to impress when actually you go, do you actually really want to work for that person? And quite often I'll have that conversation after interviews, and sometimes their initial reaction is, oh, I'm not quite sure. And I'm like, well, is that a bit of a flag? Is that the right person or organization you want to go forward with? So again, sort of that clarity is really important in that way.
I loved how you just said, why should I work for you? I think that's one of the struggles a lot of interviewees have is when they're in an interview and they ask her like, "What questions do you have for us?" And of course, a lot of times they'll be like, "Oh, I don't have anything," which also it was a big red flag. You always need to have questions for the employer, but to say, "Well, why should I work for you? What's the benefit to me?" I think that's a great question to ask because they can put it whatever they want, on a website, saying how great they are to work with, but to actually hear it from them in an interview, depending on who you're chatting with, it's actually a good question to ask. I'm gonna have to take a
Thanks.
note and to tell my clients, you need to ask, well, why should I work for you? What makes you so, why should I work for you than someone else or a competitor of theirs if they have, depending on what the industry is. So,
Yeah. And the other one for me is what are you like as a leader? Do I want to work for a leader like you? Because most people will go in organizations and, as we well know, leave organizations because of their managers.
yep,
And actually, when you're selecting your next manager, if you don't know them, then you want to be a bit more picky because they might not be quite right. And again, some of them might have the gift of the gab, like we've said, and other people have a gift of the gab as an interview. But ultimately, yeah, it's about trying to sort of explore a little bit around, do you want to work for that person? I think people forget that as well.
I agree. Yeah, all the things that I wish I had known years ago, applying for
No, yeah,
jobs
me
and like
too.
interviewing.
Hmm.
I think
To be
there's
fair,
probably,
I was going to say, to be fair, I've been quite lucky in a couple of instances because the leader I've had in two instances have been amazing and I've never wanted to leave them in some ways. But they also then have taught me a number of different lessons around obviously what good leadership looks like. So no one ever matches up to them anymore. So it's really hard to find a leader.
yeah,
But it's a good thing because when you're in interview, it's what good looks like, and what helps you, and what you thrive in. So when you're at interview stage, or you're going into that organization, it's a great self check and finding out what's important.
for sure. So you're also deeply involved in action learning sets for leaders. Can you explain what those are and how they help people solve problems and grow as leaders?
Yeah, sure. So for me, action learning is great in terms of how do you embed the theory or the practicality of what's going wrong with peers. So action learning was created back in the 40s by a guy called Reg Revens. If no one knows, you could look him up. There's lots on him. At the time, he was working in the National Coal Board, and he was tasked with improving productivity and ultimately problem solving. And he believed that actually it's not just about theory. A lot of the time, the leadership development stuff we do, it's theory, it's coaching models, it's model this, model that, but actually really doesn't really come alive until they go and try and put it into practice. And for me, that's where action learning really plays its part. It can help in a number of different situations, but for leadership, it can really help in that way. But it's ultimately a structured problem solving approach. So you get a group of leaders together, you will present a particular topic or problem that may be experiencing, and that could be a variety of different things from I'm trying to coach someone and not really taking it on board, or I'm trying to deliver this and the stakeholders aren't listening. So there's loads of different problems that might come up. But the great thing is, as a group of peers and as a network, you really start to explore that particular topic and ask each other questions and really helps sort of see things from a different perspective or see what maybe is blocking you. So it ultimately then creates a little bit more of a self-awareness. It helps them sort of listen to each other, give reflections, and really starts to unlock some of the things that quite often leaders get blocked on or feel isolated with. And I wrote a blog actually recently around it's a really powerful tool for the higher up the hierarchy you get, the more isolated you get. But having a connected peer work outside of sort of that environment really can help because it's a safe place, it's confidential, and you can really start to tackle some of the challenges that you're facing in organizations or into day-to-day basis with other peers and get help and support and think it through. I mean, one of the biggest challenges leaders face now is ultimately, it's not just about strategy, it's not just about process, it's not just about delivery. Actually, they need time to think, is this the right process? Is this the right strategy? And quite often they just, hit the play button and then never jump off that track. But action learning really creates that space to help them get that thinking. And too many leaders are missing that right now.
All right. Interesting. So for someone listening who's never been part of something like this, what might surprise them about the experience?
In a lot of ways, just the openness and I guess, the ability to just have that time, space to think and talk about something that's probably been causing them a little bit of stress, a little bit of worry, sleepless nights, whatever that might be. And it doesn't have to be a massive problem like that. The other thing they find is that net shared accountability, shared support, really helpful because it really does sort of get you to think about it from a different perspective and other people's lenses. And actually, you'll find that what am I missing? What would really help me take the next step forward and make this successful or change what I'm doing? And that's, I think, for me, is the beauty of really helping that sort of space to reflect and actually find a better path forward on something you've probably been stuck on.
All right. So your leadership story as a member of the LGBTQ plus community is powerful. How has your identity shaped your approach to coaching and helping others lead authentically?
Yeah, so God. So growing up and building my career as someone who probably didn't always fit the mold, let's just say. I am quite, like I said, stubborn, but I'm also quite strong. But I guess that you sort of get very good at reading the room and adjusting your tone and playing down sometimes parts of yourself that you maybe don't feel safe or accepted, especially in the leadership spaces I've been in, obviously a very male, straight and traditional, if you think
Hmm.
about sort of some of the organisation. But actually it's taught me a lot of things around, I guess, that masking or second guessing yourself doesn't actually help. And trying to get to a point where people just accept me for who I am has been quite a bit of a journey. But actually, it's more for a journey from my perspective. You know, I've been lucky in the sense of most people have accepted us, but it's probably been more about the barriers and perceptions that I've ever had to break down. What initially that created. So as I've grown up through a leadership ranks, I've become ultimately a leader who always looks at individuals as themselves, encourages them to be their best selves. And it doesn't matter what background, where they come from or who they are. Just, I want them to enjoy the work they do, be part of a team and ultimately, lead from their own values and their lived experience. And a lot of people find that, you don't have to work as hard, you can just be yourself. And I think that's the biggest shift for me. It takes a lot of energy to try and be something you're not. And as soon as you start to
Hmm.
say, you don't need to do that, you just be you, you're perfect, you're great as what you do, as who you are. That's trying helping people get to that point for me has been really sort of, as a leader, really critical to, I guess, my approach. And again, when I'm coaching, it's the same. I don't want people to compromise who they are for a perception that they won't fit or they'll be seen a certain way, but also working on their confidence and resilience. It's actually, regardless of how much we do with some people or organizations, will always have I guess, from a diversity perspective, maybe not be accepting, but have the
Hmm.
resilience and the confidence to just actually, I guess, stand up to that a little bit or feel that if that's not the right place, to remove themselves. So I don't coach people to fit in per se. I coach them to stand out in a way that feels safe, strong and authentic to them. So, my style is very much direct. It's no fluff, no masks. It's just honest and supportive and getting people in that position where they feel that they can do that in their own environment.
I love that. I coach my clients the same way. And I feel that when you're authentic in the workplace and you're feeling how you should feel and leading how you want to be, leading, that you're going to be a much more effective and successful leader. You're going to be a more successful, even just employee, because of that. You're not masking, you're not trying to be something you're not. And in turn, that helps you just be more comfortable, less stress than you could, I would say, deal with on a daily basis. Where if you're leading authentically, it's going to be just everything across the board is going to just be so much easier.
And I've been lucky
So
in the
have you
sense of the positions
yeah,
I've
go
been
ahead,
in, I've
sorry.
been also, yeah, that's all right. So I've been able to influence probably more the organizational culture around that as well. So I have had that as an opportunity, but I've also took that on in the sense of it's important to me that people feel like that. And if they don't, then I'm quite confident to re-educate people and ultimately help cultures and leaders. My OD side, organizational development side, and people, their background is very much around creating the right culture. And that starts at the top, the senior leaders. So it stands me in good stead in that way as well, because I can challenge some of the less desirable behavior in some ways.
Yeah, for sure. That's great. So, have you noticed a shift in how inclusive or affirming leadership spaces have become over the years, or is there still a long way to go? And I know we're in a unique time right now because things are changing in, with inclusivity and diversity. But yeah,
Yeah. There's definitely been a shift, and yeah, I think it's probably slowed a little bit more recently. But I think organisations are actually twigging on, and leaders of organisations are actually recognising the value of performance in some ways. So if you start talking about metrics and KPIs and linking it, the actual benefit to the company itself, if actually you have a workforce that are engaged, motivated, putting their energy into doing a really good job rather than obviously doing, wasting their energy on elements that actually, if you can get rid of, it would be a lot better in the long term. So, yeah, there's definitely still passion out there for making sure that it is inclusive, and a lot of leaders actually do see the benefit, which is ultimately where we want to get to.
definitely. And you are not the only person I've heard that says, yeah, there's data out there. There's results. There's studies that have been done that when all of these types of, inclusion, diversity, all of these are put into place, in the end, you have a happier probably employee, you have a
Yep.
happier company, and in turn, they're probably producing better as an employee as well because everyone's in a much better space. So awesome. All right. I'm going to ask you some, as I call my rapid fire questions. These I mentioned to you this before we started recording. I asked all my guests these, and some of them, the most of the time, they're having to do with what we've been chatting with today, but also there's a few in there that are kind of just off the cuffs. I challenge you because this seems to be a little bit of a challenge that they are rapid fire. That means you don't need to think too long about them, and just try to think what comes to your mind first. And if we have to come back to one, that's fine. I've had that happen a few times, and just because something wasn't coming, right away. But
Mhm.
I have had many interview where I had to cut out a lot of extra dead air because of the thinking of some of these questions. I jokingly say, yeah, let's try to make don't think too much on them. But if we have, as I said, if we have to come back to one, that's totally fine. So if your career journey were a book title, what would it be?
A Rebelton. So I always link my title back to a farmer becoming a rebel in a corporate organisation.
All right. I like that. All right. So, coffee shop, beach, or library, where do you get your best ideas?
Fully enough, coffee shop.
All right. I like that. What's a song that instantly makes you feel powerful?
Raise Your Glass by Pink.
That is an amazing song, I have to say. I
Yeah.
agree with you. That definitely, I can see, because I like the song. It's a great song. When you actually listen to the words, you're like, okay, she's not messing around.
Oh, yeah.
So, and one last fun question. One thing that you always recommend to clients, but secretly find hard to do it yourself?
And that is a very good question. Take a step back. So quite often I get people to take a step back to try and look at it from perspective, but sometimes I can be quite impatient and want to get going. So sometimes I have to really check myself on that and practice what I preach.
All right. I like those. Those are great answers. So, Charlotte, after everything we've talked about, from breaking out of burnout to redefining career success and building confidence, what's one powerful piece of advice or actionable tip you'd want to leave with anyone listening who's feeling stuck, unfulfilled, or unsure of their next step?
Funnily enough, take that step back and think about what you really want. And is this the right path for you? And if it's not, reach out and do something about it.
All right. Well, Charlotte, thank you for bringing your wisdom, your honesty, and your heart to the show. Your journey from burnout to empowerment is such a powerful reminder that our careers don't have to fit inside old boxes, and that the best leadership often starts with walking away from what no longer fits.
Fab, thank you very much for having us on the show.
And so, listeners, if today's conversation sparked something in you, Don't sit on it. Book a free clarity call with Charlotte at stepupforsuccess.co.uk and take the first step toward designing a career that works for you. And don't forget, if this episode resonated, share it with someone you love, leave a review, and hit that follow button so you never miss an episode of Empowered and Out. Until next time, stay empowered, stay out, and keep building a life and career that reflects all of who you are.